Welcome to Champlain Maker Fair's renewed culture of innovation, Makers on Screen. I'm your host, Doug Webster, and today's show is College MakerLabs, Making Integrated with Academics. The Maker movement brings us together with tools and desire to improve the world around us. Since Champlain Maker Fair began in 2012, there has been a surge of interest in making, creation of makerspaces, and learning with new tools. My guest today is Ken Howell, Assistant Professor, Division of Communication and Creative Media, and Faculty Advisor, Champlain MakerLab at Champlain College. Welcome to the show, Ken.
Thank you.
Great. So Ken, tell us what a MakerLab is.
Well, MakerLab, the MakerLab at Champlain College is, I like to think the lab part is kind of exploring what a makerspace can be. Mm-hmm. That term makerspace is sort of open-ended still, right? We don't know exactly what that means yet. And how that directly integrates with education is a sort of laboratory activity for us. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, how's it compare with a makerspace? I mean, your community makerspaces like Generator, for example.
Well, I think for us, it's where makerspaces meet education. So what are the unique benefits that a makerspace offers to an educational environment that maybe traditional classrooms don't? And I think that's, to me, the really interesting part of it.
Mm-hmm. So what got you and Champlain College started in creating this Maker Lab?
Yeah, I've been involved with the maker movement in Vermont for a number of years, and I've been really interested in it. And I teach in the Emergent Media Center at Champlain College, and that center is a center in which we work on all kinds of media and technology projects, usually with some sort of focus on social innovation or some dimension of change. And to do that, we have we use students to do the work, and so the experience for them is really a practice of experiential education. Of course, making and makerspaces fit perfectly into that experiential learning dimension, and so that's sort of where it fits in.
Now, why is making important?
Well, I think making is as much about a process as it is about a product, and I like to say that the tools and technologies that we're exploring, I like to think of them more as methods of study rather than subjects of study. And if you look at it in those terms, a method of study, then that type of investigatory evolution of problems, that kind of taking your initial idea and developing it through multiple iterations, is a practice of learning that's really multidimensional, works well for a variety of types of learners, and really, I think, maximizes the learning benefit of any project you take on.
Now, do you think it applies at multiple levels? I mean, how far down in the grades do you think it applies?
I think it could apply to anyone. Yeah. I mean, I look at my 6-year-old daughter, right, and this is how she learns. She picks things up, she takes them apart, she sees how they work, she tries to modify them or make them into something else. So I think this is a very natural expression for human beings. And I think that for whatever reason, somewhere along the way, a lot of us lose that. Yeah. So I'm really glad to see that kind of coming back into the public imagination as being a tool for learning.
Now, we oftentimes in Maker Movement, we talk about failure being an option versus that failure is not an option thing. Why, and there's some terms we use, right, to describe failure. And why is it important that we do that?
Well, I think failure is inevitable. And I think that, it's a good question. Failure is really important because that's how you learn, right? Yeah. And the more learning you do, the more failing you do, therefore, the more learning you do, right? And I think that when people are trying to find something innovative or find something inventive or just have the world make sense on their sort of own terms, that failure really helps people understand material on their own terms.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember as an engineer, we had, do it right the first time, and that was always there in front of us. But we didn't always do it right the first time. So, and we always had to make design changes and that type of thing. So doing that in an education environment makes sense that you do it. You do the failure and you learn how to get out of it.
Yeah, and I think you in the process you evolve a better version of the problem you were trying to solve in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. So, so as far as tools and equipment in the MakerLab, can you describe what you have for tools and equipment?
Sure, we have some 3D printers. We actually have 3 3D printers. One of them is actually on loan at Generator, where we have a partnership with Generator Makerspace in downtown Burlington. We also have a laser cutter in the MakerLab, a CNC vinyl cutter, a host of electronics, Arduinos, and all kinds of sensors and other options that we sort of have like a library checkout system for. We also have some wide format inkjet printers, 3D scanner, a variety of hand tools, and a whole lot of stuff like crafts and sewing machines, because it's not all about the high tech, it's about the integration of the low and the high tech, where really innovative ideas come from.
Now, we have some pictures. I'm not quite sure if we can see them up here. But, well, they'll come up in a minute, I think. Okay. So we can take a look at, and you had an opening, grand opening, day before Champlain Maker Fair last fall.
Yes.
And I think you have some shots over here. They'll show up in a second here, but
that was in October, and that's the opening there.
Okay.
Yeah, that's Don Lockman, our new president, and that's Ann DeMarle, who's the director of the Emergent Media Center in which the MakerLab is housed, and myself, of course. And we did an unusual ribbon cutting, actually. We used a laser cutter to cut the ribbon.
Oh, great.
And Don Lockman actually tweeted to the machine to get it to actually turn on.
Oh, there you go.
Cut the ribbon there. That's an example of our Projet 4500. It's, I think, one of the only full-color 3D printers in the state. It prints sort of like really kind of like a colored super glue, and then it kind of dusts it with powder and builds the model up over time that way.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay,
and what's
great.
unique about that one too is that it can print, because it's in powder, it can print shapes without any kind of support underneath. So that was an example of a shape that you couldn't probably print on another 3D printer.
Oh, great. Hey, here's a broader shot here.
That's the lab itself. So that area you're looking in there is our classroom, and that's where we also do electronics. And that's actually one of my favorite projects. Robin Shafto is a very talented freshman in lab tech in our lab, and she, as a self-portrait, made her own banjo, and then she made these gloves actually to help her tune it and do other stuff with it.
Really?
It's sort of a data glove that uses flex sensors to know how she's moving her hands when she's playing the banjo.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's incredible. Yeah.
That's another student's project. He actually cut into layers Tyrannosaurus Rex and then stacked them together to make it. Fortunately, he was using a different thickness plywood than he thought, so we have a little bit more raptor there than Tyrannosaurus Rex.
Oh, yeah.
But that's okay.
Yeah, it's a little bit longer.
It's a little bit elongated, that's right.
Yeah.
And that's the bed of the laser cutter. Looks like it's in action. That's also shots from the opening. Numerous students and people visiting in that shot. I think that's Sasha probably talking about a bicycle frame he's actually prototyping.
Huh, okay. All right, cool. Well, now, who do you serve? Who's your main audience for the Maker?
Well, Champlain students, of course, but we also serve Champlain alumni, faculty, and staff. And we also have a partnership with Generator.
Yep.
So that partnership is basically an exchange membership where our students can go down to Generator, and Generator members can come back up to the Champlain MakerLab. And then we also are branching into kind of a service bureau model where we're 3D printing for local companies and things like that.
Oh, cool. Now, As far as high school involvement, do you have any connections that way, or is that kind of out of the zone?
Not
Is that-
explicitly. We've had a
Yeah.
lot of interest from local high schools. We've given a lot of tours
Yep.
of students, teachers bringing their students to come in and see our lab.
Yep.
And we're always happy to show off what we're doing and have them in and talk about it.
Do you see that as a good recruitment tool? Or
Yeah,
is it
I mean,
kind
I
of
think it's
people gonna be
definitely
into
a little self-serving, right?
Yeah.
I mean, but these are the students that we want, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
yeah, I think there's that. But I also feel like that K through 12 is really one of the areas where making in education is really,
Yep.
really happening. And so I kind of want to help in however I can.
Yep. Yep. Now, we talked a little bit earlier about making in education, but how does making support student learning? I mean, can you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, I think the biggest part is really that I'll say two main things really. One is that the process of iterative design, as I mentioned earlier, where you don't necessarily know the destination in mind when you start a project. I think that's really important because it's the type of open-ended learning. Whereas previously we had this model of conceive of what you're going to build, plan it all out, think it through, and then build it. I think that stifles creativity and I think that stifles innovation, as opposed to this other method where you're sort of being responsive to what's happening in real time and changing your definition of what you're trying to do
Exactly.
and the problem you're trying to solve. And I think that's a much higher order type of learning where students are really engaging critical thinking and creative thinking, something that we prize at Champlain and are trying to cultivate in them.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, Champlain College, haven't you been through the learning standards and competencies and that type of? So how do you compare learning standards with making? I mean, some people say, I'm talking about Dale Doherty in particular, the founder of Make and Maker Faire. He's corrected me several times on this. And this is a question: should making support learning standards or learning standards support making? And which way does that go? I'll tell you what Dale said.
Well, I guess I would say that it's best as a symbiotic relationship,
Right.
One should inform the other. I always think of relationships like that as being more of an ecology in which one is kind of influencing the other. I think, though, that what I said earlier holds true in that regard, that if you think of technology and specifically making as being a method of study rather than a subject of study, it's literally applicable to any subject that you want to learn. And so in that sense, I think it fits with standards very well.
Good. So what are some projects that students have created in MakerLab?
Well, I mentioned that one that of the banjo self-portrait and data glove. What I think is interesting about that is that along the lines of that iterative process, she probably never would have made those gloves if she hadn't made the banjo first. So that's an example of not having that destination in mind and rather being open to new possibilities as they present themselves. Another project that I love is an MFA student of ours. She wanted to tackle the problem of high-functioning, or rather low-functioning autistic children who right now they basically just have these kind of karate helmets to put on their heads to basically contain them. And she wanted to embed sensors and technology in those helmets to see, could she find out information about what was about to cause an episode? Would music help? Would lighting help? And I just loved the idea of that project because it's really brought into focus the kind of human dimension of making.
Now, as far as all the projects go, I mean, do most of them provide some social good? I mean, would you say,
Well,
or is it? Or
we don't require
it's
social
not required,
good. It sort of
yeah.
ends up that way because we, it's sort of in our DNA, I suppose. And we take, I think, the responsibility of being a media practitioner or being an artist in this time that we live in. That's a very serious responsibility. And I think that we are giving our students a lot of power. And like Spider-Man said, with great power comes great responsibility.
Oh yes.
Actually, I think it's Voltaire, but anyway.
Now, to what degree do you expect student projects to become business?
Well, certainly if a student comes down to the lab and they have a business in mind, they can pursue it there. One of the things that we intentionally maintain is that students don't have to demonstrate a direct connection to their curriculum. They can work on their own projects there. And that's important because I think they themselves need to determine the relevance to their curriculum of the projects that they're working on, so that if they're working on something that doesn't appear like a business and suddenly does appear as a business, they can exploit that opportunity, and they can help that. We can help that blossom into something, something grand.
Yeah, yeah. So no pressure.
No pressure at all.
So now, what about community makerspaces? I mean, what's your take on commercialization in community makerspaces? Do you think the intent is for economic development 100%, or is it some other equation?
Well, like I said, I think my primary interest is in the process and not necessarily the
Yeah.
product. The product is almost a consequence of good process for me. And I think one likely outcome of that is that you're going to come up with a product or something like that you might be able to sell. Another possible outcome is that you're going to come up with something that was entertaining and you learned from doing. So I think that there's room for sort of all boats in that harbor, for any kind of result to happen, as long as makerspaces really facilitate that process.
Now, what does entrepreneurship mean to you? Is it a business plan, or is it problem solving, or is it both? Or what does it mean? 'Cause we hear all kinds of, well, if you're doing entrepreneurship, well, you got to go in and do a business program, and you write a business plan, check.
Yeah, I think if I were really understood entrepreneurism, I'd be rich by now. So I don't really know what that means. I think that mostly it's a mindset about looking for opportunity and recognizing key value propositions when you see them. And that can be in the materials that you're using, that can be in the technologies that you're using, that can be in the people around you and what they can bring, the collaborations that are possible, or just the overall business climate that you find yourself in. All of those things can yield ideas. And the entrepreneur is the person who, I guess, can really kind of pull those from the air and then turn them into something real. Yeah.
Oh, cool. Now, as far as makerspaces go in colleges, I mean, do you think every college should have a makerspace?
Of course.
Or MakerLab?
Of course, they all should. Yeah.
Now, liberal arts, engineering?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think that it's not a subject; it's a method, and it can be applied to any type of learning that you choose, and it's really applicable for any area. Any area of study. Plus, I think that makerspaces are inherently interdisciplinary. And so for a marketing student at Champlain, for example, to interact with a graphic designer on a project in which they're both trying to design something, that kind of cross-pollination is invaluable. They don't get that anywhere else.
Yeah, right.
So I think that's really makerspaces on colleges give that kind of interdisciplinary idea a real jolt.
Now look out maybe 5 years, 10 years. Where do you see MakerLabs in education settings? Not just in colleges, but maybe even high schools. I mean, do you see it playing more of a role than versus a lab over one side of the building and just for a few? Or do you see it more of a, I mean, right now yours is at the Emergent Media Center down on Pine Street, or off of Pine Street. Do you see it becoming more central to the function of the college and the
I hope
access
so.
to all students?
I hope so. I'm obviously, involved with this, looking at a kind of larger plan. I hope, but I think that the interest and surge of interest in making, amongst a lot of people for a lot of different reasons is a good sign, and I think that bodes well for the health of makerspaces long term.
So, as far as a high school goes, what would your ideal be for a high school, if you've thought about it?
Well, you know, my emphasis, I think, would be on that process. You know, as much as I love the idea of STEM, I prefer the idea of STEAM
Yeah.
because I think art really gives that dimension of process to what you're doing. I think makerspaces for high school kids are invaluable. You know, and I think the closer we can get to that point at which they were natural makers, you know, as I said earlier, when you're young, you're a natural maker. The more we can sort of keep that going and not accidentally hammer that out of them and then have to put it back, the better.
Yeah. Now, last question here. Now, what is your favorite aspect of having a Maker Lab in your building?
Working with the students, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I love to hear a student talk passionately about an idea and then just kind of, you know, talk with them about where it could go, how we could build it, what we could do next. I mean, that part is what I think attracted me to teaching, and making is just sort of that on steroids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, great. Well, thank you for being on the show, Ken.
Absolutely.
Today's show was College Maker Labs, Making Integrated with Academics. And our guest was Ken Howell, Assistant Professor and Faculty Advisor at Champlain College's Maker Lab. For more information about this show, related internet links, and other shows in this series, go to retn.org and look for Makers. Also, for more information on Champlain College's Maker Lab, go to makers.champlain.edu. Thank you for joining us.